Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Things, Linode, and Moo. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Well, recovering from our long,
Yes.
our long August and September. I mean, I know it's nice to be on the other side. Absolutely. It's going to take a little time to kind of get caught up on the things that have been neglected and to recover a little bit. But I think we're both getting there little by little.
Yeah, and there's also, in addition to that, I've also been working on another launch, which is coming up very soon.
Yes.
So I'm not quite done yet because I'm putting the finishing touches on this other thing, which I really want to be a surprise. It is something very, very different from anything that we've done at Mac Stories this month. It is very much a Mac Stories thing. Once you know what it is, I think
Right.
it totally makes sense, but it's not an article from me. It's not a special story. It's something completely different. So I've also been working on that. And after that, I'll probably be done in the context of, okay, so the month of September is over. We did it. We actually launched everything that we wanted to launch.
Yeah, if you hadn't told me what this surprise is, there's no way I would have ever guessed it, even knowing you as well as
nice.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no way I would have ever guessed that this is what is coming. So I'm looking forward to you launching that too. And it's, as much as I like to feel like we got past the hump of the iOS 13 review, I still have Catalina to go, and we've got lots and lots of.
You do.
We have lots and lots of apps to check out too. So it's going to continue to be busy for a little while. Before we get into today's topic, I want to take a moment and ask our listeners if they would support St. Jude's Children's Hospital. This is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And our good friends at Relay FM, Stephen Hackett and Mike Hurley, have been spending the month of September raising money for St. Jude, which St. Jude's does is it treats kids with cancer regardless of the financial wherewithal of the family, which is a fantastic thing because, there's nothing worse than having a child who has cancer. It's a very tough time for any family. And the last thing you want to have to do is worry about things like finances. And so that's taken out of the equation, right? And this is a fantastic hospital that's in Memphis, Tennessee, where Stephen is based. But it's not just a hospital that serves that local community. It serves people from over the world. People fly in. St. Jude's takes care of the expenses, and St. Jude, treats the kids. And they also have all kinds of reciprocal arrangements with other hospitals in other countries and all around the United States, as well as an incredible research facility that's made great strides in increasing the survival rate of kids who get cancer.
Yeah.
So it's a fantastic cause. Relay's been raising money all September long. Last I checked, they were over $230,000, which is just amazing. And
it's incredible.
And they've increased their goal to $250,000. So they're really close. They've only got about $20,000 more, a little less, to get to that. And I'd like to ask our listeners to consider donating to St. Jude, because I know as a father myself of 3 kids, and my kids are very close to Stephen Hackett's kids' ages, just in terms of the spread, just about 10 years older. And I know I can only imagine what he and his family went through when their eldest was diagnosed with cancer as just an infant who was only months old. And he's doing great now. And it's thanks to St. Jude. And that is an incredibly remarkable thing and also a great cause. And we just like people to consider it. So we will put a link in the show notes. The place to go is stjude.org/relay to learn more and see the work that they're doing for raising money for this cause.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up 2 more points about this. First is that St. Jude does more than just provide treatment for free. It provides travel accommodations, housing, food, all kinds of services for families who have kids that need to undergo treatment at St. Jude. So it's really an amazing organization that tries to make this entire process as easy for the families as possible. And the second thing that I want to bring up is how, as a cancer survivor myself, I can only imagine what it must be to go through what I went through, but for a child. I did chemo and treatments and back and forth with hospitals when I was 23 and 24, and I saw the impact that had on my family, on my mom, on my girlfriend, on my friends. And I cannot even begin to imagine what it must be like for a child. And so, in the month of September, we've all spent money on, I don't know, new iPhones or new Apple Watches, or maybe you even spent money on Club Mac stories, and I'm very appreciative of that. But I just think that even if it's just $5 or $10, that you can donate to St. Jude for a good cause, for an important cause, for something that we have no idea what it must be like to go through, I think that would be pretty awesome. And so we wanted to take 5 minutes away from the show today to talk about this and to share our support for what our friends at Relay FM are doing, and to direct our listeners to the St. Jude website. So if you can, go donate, and that would be pretty sweet.
I want to dive into our topic now. And
yes,
what we wanted to talk about today is third-party support for the changes in shortcuts. So we're talking about third-party app developers and what this means both to them and to users like you and me. And we're not going to get into examples of shortcuts because that's something that I know that you and Ryan are going to be doing on Adapt coming up in a series that you just recently announced. And I'm really looking forward to hearing that. So today, instead, we're going to cover kind of the changes that have been made and also some of the apps that we've been using and how they're impacted by this change to shortcuts. And for me, what really clicked was when I first started using pCalc by James Thompson, because pCalc is one of those apps that it has some very deep functionality in terms of engineering and other kinds of scientific calculators, but you can also use it to do just simple things like converting values and converting dollars to euros and euros to pounds and things like that. And what James had to do in iOS 12 to support Siri shortcuts and deal with inputting information into and out of shortcuts using pCalc was you had to swap things on and off the clipboard, because basically the workaround for not being able to directly input data from a third-party app into shortcuts was to use the clipboard as kind of a universal global variable that you could park a little information on the clipboard, then bring it into another step, then whatever the results of that were, put it back on the clipboard, then retrieve it, and it made for some powerful shortcuts, but it also made for some somewhat messy and complex shortcuts. And I know, when I wrote the review of pCalc, the update that just came out about a week ago, I looked at what you had done in iOS 12 with pCalc, and I thought, all right, I'm going to see what can I do. Can I recreate what Federico did, but with the new changes to shortcuts, and what will that look like? And so I think your shortcut had 12 steps, and a lot of that was swapping information on and off the clipboard and dealing with the variables and so forth. But with the changes, with the addition of parameters and the ability to pass data directly into a third-party action, I was able to cut that down to, I think it was 3 steps. And it's not only that it's shorter, but it's also incredibly readable compared to what things were before, because the actions read kind of like natural language. You can look at a block of pCalc and see that, okay, it takes two current, like for the currency conversion one, it takes 2 currencies, and then it takes a category. So the category is what kind of action are you trying to accomplish? In this case, it was conversion of currencies. And then once you pick that, it allows you to pick from, there's an incredibly long list of currencies, and you can pick dollars, euros, and probably 20, 30 others. But yeah, it was incredibly easy to do, and it's also super readable. I mean, has that been your experience too?
Yeah, pCalc is really a great example of shortcut, the shortcuts adoption in iOS 13, and especially because of how it's a good example of parameters being able to dynamically return information from pcalc. So the idea that when you're tapping the category name parameter in the shortcut, it updates the units that you see in the other parameters. All of that is happening at runtime. All of that is happening when the shortcut executes. So it's really a dynamic way of, in a way, communicating back and forth with pcalc, but outside of the pcalc app. So all of these can happen, for example, when you're running a pcalc shortcut from the shortcuts widget, or in iOS 13.1, which is launching tomorrow on the 24th, all of these can happen within Siri. So you can, in Apple's terminology, you can resolve a shortcut while you're running the shortcut. So it's really a different way to think about automation than it used to be before with URL schemes and X-callback or the clipboard workarounds that you mentioned. And it's really a great example of dealing with numbers with pcalc is a great way to get started with shortcuts. You can, of course, you can type a number directly into the parameter field of pcalc, but you can also use any other action that returns a number to put it into one of the parameters of pcalc. So you want to use ask for input, for example, and you can pass a number to that parameter. Or if you're dealing, I don't know, with a web API that gives you a number, you can pass that number value to pcalc. So it's this idea of connecting apps with each other through actions without ever having to leave the Shortcuts app. I believe that's really powerful.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Things, the best-in-class to-do app for iPad, iPhone, and the Mac. You can organize anything with Things, whether it's work, personal, or family life. Things is there to help you keep on top of your tasks and stay organized. One of the things that I like the most about this app is that whenever Apple comes out with new features for one of its OSs, Things is right there with support. And this year is absolutely no different. I want to dive in because there's a lot of changes. Some of them are available now with iOS 13, and a few will also be available tomorrow when iOS and iPadOS 13.1 is released. So on the iPhone, you've got integration with dark mode, and it looks fantastic. There have also been improvements to accessibility, and Things supports text editing gestures, the new ones that work really well. I like them a lot. Okay, but most of all, what's most important is that Things now supports the new powerful actions in shortcuts. That means you can do all kinds of things like create new to-dos, show lists, and a whole lot more. And on top of that, tomorrow when 13.1 comes out on Tuesday, you'll have access to conversational shortcuts, allowing you to make requests of Siri about your things, to-dos, and lists and projects, and have Siri give you options like which list do you want to look at. That's going to be fantastic. I've been trying it, and it works super well. On the iPad, you've got a bunch of other things that are coming again tomorrow. There'll be multi-window support, which is one of my favorite new features of iPadOS. With Things, that means that you can put two lists side by side and drag and drop your tasks between lists. It makes keeping organized and getting those lists in order easier than ever before. And on top of that, Cultured Code has built in a set of shortcuts for the keyboard that allow you to manage those windows so that you can use the keyboard shortcuts to open the windows, close them, and even switch the focus between the two of them, which makes it even easier than before. On top of that, there's all kinds of other features that have been built into the iPad that, as I mentioned, were in the iPhone as well. All right, so these are the latest updates in a long line of great improvements to Things over the past years. If you're interested at all in to-do apps, you really should give Things a shot, especially if you haven't looked at it in a while. There have been a ton of updates in 2019 that are worth taking a look at again and trying. So go to their website today to download a free trial of the Mac app and to learn more about the iPhone and iPad apps. Go to thingsapp.com to check it all out. They've got all the information there that you need. Again, that URL to check out Things by Cultured Code is thingsapp.com. thingsapp.com. Our thanks to Things for their support of App Stories. I do want to ask you one question, and that's about,
Yes.
you mentioned X callback URLs, and that was the way that you could tack data onto a URL using parameters and pass data back and forth between different apps using shortcuts. Now, where do you think things go from here with that? Because I really don't see much use, if any, for using those any longer.
Most of the automation use cases, I think, have been replaced by native shortcuts in iOS 13. Just because most people used to rely on Xcallback to create data or retrieve data from an app, but that involved leaving shortcuts and opening that app, and because it was actually called a callback, return to shortcuts. So it was this dance of opening another app and returning to shortcuts, and all of that is now gone. You don't need to do that anymore. A good example of this would be the new shortcuts support in Things, the task manager by Culture Code. Before, you had this pretty visual action in the Shortcuts app where you could fill these different fields for the task's name and due date or notes, for example. Now, you have the same action in iOS 13, but it's a native shortcut. It does everything that the old action used to do, but it runs inside Shortcuts. You never leave the Shortcuts app. So you can create a to-do inside Things because it's running code from the Things app, but it's inside Shortcuts. You never leave Shortcuts. You don't have to open and go back and do the callback. All of that is gone. There are still, I guess, some use cases for X callback automation. And that is if you want to actually launch a different app and be taken into a specific screen. I guess there's still a use case for that. But in 90% of other cases, I would say just use the shortcuts because they're faster, they're more reliable in that it's an actual, it's an actual native feature, and you don't need to take care of things like encoding text and encoding URLs anymore. All of that is handled by the Shortcuts app and by the app that provides the actions. So it's so much safer and faster and more secure than before. I don't know why for most actions that involve passing data or retrieving data, I don't know why you would use X callback at this point.
Yeah, I don't really expect. I think that's a good point that if you really have a reason to open an app, that there is still a use for that. But I agree, I don't see a use case for it in 90+% of the circumstances. The other thing I guess worth mentioning, since this show is going to come out the day before 13.1, is Siri Shortcuts is going to be part of 13.1. And I've gotten at least a couple of questions from readers of Mac Stories about what happened to Siri. How do you get this add to Siri UI? Where does that come from? You want to explain where that is? Because things have moved around, and I think it's not just a matter of moving, but it's a matter of how it works. And I think it has confused some people.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things worth pointing out. As far as the Shortcuts app is concerned, you no longer need or can add a custom phrase for one of your shortcuts to Siri. That is because every shortcut is now enabled for Siri by default. You can just open Siri and speak the name of a shortcut, and you will be able to run it. This is great in that you no longer have to assign a phrase beforehand to one of your shortcuts in the Shortcuts app. You can just say the name and it'll run. It's got the downside of you can no longer keep a separate phrase for your shortcuts. So if you wanted to have, let's say, for example, a pretty visual name for the shortcut to appear in the library, but have a more conversational phrase when run inside Siri, that is no longer possible because you can no longer assign a separate phrase to a shortcut in iOS 13. The name of the shortcut is also the phrase automatically by default. The other aspect is that there is still an add to Siri functionality in iOS 13 for third-party apps. So you will be able to assign phrases to actions from third-party apps using the Add to Siri UI. But unlike in iOS 12, you no longer need to actually speak the phrase into the microphone. You can type the phrase using the keyboard. So that is an excellent addition to the Add to Siri screen. And the screen has also been redesigned, so it's more clear what happens. You got a when I say section at the top, and at the bottom, a section that says do. So it's sort of like IFTTT, shows you cause and effect. It's very nicely presented. And in the do section, you have sort of like a mini editor where you can customize the behavior of a shortcut before you add it to Siri. And that is also made possible by parameters and being able to modify actions which have this new natural language appearance. Most actions in the new Shortcuts app are presented like sentences. So, for example, resize image by, they're actually displayed in English, in natural language. So all of this is new in iOS 13, but the basics that you gotta keep in mind are there's still an Add to Siri UI for third-party apps. For the Shortcuts app, which is now built into the system, every shortcut can be run in Siri by default by saying the name of the shortcut.
Right, and once you add something to Siri, it shows up in a couple of places. You'll find it in the gallery section of shortcuts, as well as if you tap into if you start a new shortcut and you go into the library of actions and tap on apps and find the app that you added a Siri shortcut for, then you'll see it in there as well, right?
Yeah, so all the shortcuts that you add from third-party apps end up in the library of the Shortcuts app. So there's no longer a separation between the Shortcuts app and Siri shortcuts that you used to find in settings in iOS 12. Now everything lives together in the library of the Shortcuts app. You can go to the gallery to find suggestions for Siri shortcuts based on apps that you have installed on your device. That section also used to live in settings in iOS 12. Now it's in the gallery. There's a section of the gallery called Shortcuts from Your Apps, and that is based on what the system thinks you may be interested in adding to your shortcuts.
Right, and it'll also put things in there like, oh, say I just sent you something in iMessages, then it'll have one in there that'll say, text Federico or something like that. You'll see a lot of that sort of thing too. Or if I played something recently in Overcast, it'll say, play adapt in shortcuts or something like that, and they'll have that kind of suggestion as well. The conversational part too is important to keep in mind, because when we were talking about pCalc a little while ago, you mentioned you can put an ask for input at the beginning, and that's really powerful, because then what you can do is if you have a currency converter that converts euros to dollars, you can have Siri ask you for that input, and you just then state the number of euros you want to convert, and it will respond both on screen and with its voice the number of US dollar equivalents. So it's really powerful that way.
Yeah, all actions that require an interaction, so choosing from a list, choosing from a menu, entering or dictating some text, all of those will be bridged to Siri voice interactions in iOS and iPadOS 13.1. So you will, when you hit one of those steps, such as choose from menu or dictate text, for example, you will no longer be taken into the Shortcuts app as it used to happen in iOS 12 and iOS 13.0, but you will stay within Siri and you will be able to have a conversation with Siri so that you can choose from a list of options or enter some text without leaving the assistant. So everything will happen inside Siri. This is called Conversational Shortcuts, and it's launching tomorrow.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you can instantly deploy and manage an SSD server in the Linode cloud. And you can get your server up and running in just seconds with your choice of Linux distro, resources, and node location. Linode has hundreds of thousands of customers, and they're all looked after by their incredible 24/7 support team. If you ever run into a problem, just send them an email or give them a call. Or chat over IRC in the Linode community if that works better, whatever suits your needs. Of course, they also have some super useful guides and support documentation, so if you ever need to just look something up quickly, you can do that too. Their new management panel is now in beta at cloud.linode.com. This new management console is a single-page application built using the cutting-edge React.js stack and is backed entirely by their public API. And you know what? It's open source too, so give it a try. Linode has pricing options for everybody. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for just $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. And Linode have a special offer just for you. As a listener of App Stories, you can go to linode.com/appstories and use the promo code AppStories2019 to get $20 toward any Linode plan. On the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's 4 free months. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, you have nothing to lose. So give Linode a try today. That's linode.com/appstories and the promo code AppStories2019 to learn more, sign up, and make the most of that $20 credit. Our thanks to Linode for their support of the show. We've spent a fair amount of time so far talking about pCalc just because that's a good way to get started. I just, looking at it myself, I thought, okay, now I really understand what the changes are and what they can accomplish. But there's so many more apps that have already been launched on the App Store and are being updated in the coming days that I think we ought to talk about some of those as well. What are some that you've seen that you've found particularly useful in working over the summer as you test all this stuff?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I've seen plenty, and it's been awesome to see third-party developers release a lot of updates over the past couple of weeks. There's a couple that I want to bring up right away, and they are Yoink and Secure Shellfish. So one of the things to keep in mind with parameters and the new Shortcuts app and third-party developers is that you don't have to pass just text between actions. Parameters can be more than text. Parameters can be any kind of variable in the Shortcuts app. And so in these two cases, both Yoink and Secure Shellfish can accept a parameter, can accept a variable that is a file, that is a document, that is a file object. So it can be an image, it can be a PDF document, it can be a video, right? It doesn't have to be a number or a string of text, as in pCalc or in other shortcuts that deal with text. It can be an actual file. And so, for example, in Yoink, and Yoink, by the way, is a clipboard manager / shelf type of app, has received an amazing iOS and iPadOS update with a lot of new native features based on the iOS 13 APIs. It's got a new shortcut, which is called save, I think it's called save file in Yoink. And basically what you can do is you can pass it's got a parameter right in there in the action, and you can pass any document, any file from any other action in Shortcuts and save it into the Yoink app without ever leaving the Shortcuts app. So you can save a PDF document, you can save a photo, you can save a zip archive, all from Shortcuts. So it becomes possible to do things like download this file from the web and save it into the Yoink app, but without ever having to open Yoink. You can do it all from Shortcuts. You can even specify, thanks to parameters, you can specify where in the main library you want to insert the new file, and you can even decide to create a new folder, which is called a new stack in Yoink when the shortcut runs. So it's really amazing. And Secure Shellfish, which is a native SSH and SFTP client by Anders Borum, is the maker of Working Copy. You can upload any document, any file from Shortcuts to a remote server using FTP and the app's new shortcuts. These shortcuts, they come with a bunch of parameters that you can configure. You can pick a remote server from a parameter. You can specify a file path, and you can pick any variable from Shortcuts. I'm using the native shortcuts for Secure Shellfish to upload images and PDF documents and text files to my remote server that I have SFTP access to, and it works beautifully. It doesn't take me into an FTP UI. It all runs from shortcuts. In fact, it even works from the widget. So you can upload stuff to your FTP server from a widget, which I think is just insane. And it's all made possible by parameters, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One that I've been thinking about that I think is going to add some power to my home automation setup is Carrot Weather. And in particular, what I think is going to be interesting about that is that we've talked about this before. I have a Netatmo weather station that records the temperature just outside my home, and it is not supported by HomeKit. It doesn't have any HomeKit support in it, but it does have an API, and Carrot Weather has an integration with Netatmo, so you can get the data from the Netatmo into Carrot Weather. And now with the shortcut integration that Carrot Weather has, I can get the information off that Netatmo and use it to trigger various HomeKit automations in the house. Like, say, I don't know, it's exceptionally hot one day here, and I can have a shortcut that will then trigger my thermostat to crank the air conditioning up a little bit. So there's things like that expand the utility of some of the devices around the house too, that I think are going to be helped by shortcuts. And that's another example too, Carrot Weather, of an integration that's not just text or numbers, because you can get a whole chunk of weather data out of Carrot Weather with its actions that is essentially a dictionary of, temperature and humidity and cloud cover and all that kind of thing. And just pick whichever value that you want to use in your shortcut to pass to the next action. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Moo. Moo is an online print and design company specializing in customizable business cards, postcards, stickers, and more for your business. Moo is having a big sale right now, and it's live on moo.com. From September 19th through September 25th, you can get up to 35% off on all accessories, business cards, stickers, postcards, and flyers. It excludes shipping. This sale is a perfect time to reorder and stock up on your favorite designs, or to design something incredibly new and fresh to try out, or even just try a new product that you haven't tried before to see if you like it. Moo rarely discounts its products this significantly, so you don't want to miss out. Head on over to moo.com/relay today to check out Moo's full suite of products, including business cards, postcards, invitations, letterhead, stickers, notebooks, and flyers, allowing you to seamlessly promote your brand. Moo's quality is one of a kind, with special finishes like gold foil, a brand new silver foil, raised spot gloss, and letterpress. And it's all these little touches that make you stand out. And if you don't want to do your own design, you can have one of your Moo's templates and use those, because Moo has beautiful templates which are inspired by their most creative customers. I've been using Moo business cards forever. I think it's been like 6 or 7 years now, and I love them. My most recent ones I got just before WWDC this year for Mac Stories, and they're the kind with the rounded corners and the nice smooth finish on them. They look really professional, and they came out perfectly when I ordered them. So head on over to moo.com/relay today to check out that sale, as well as all the other products from Moo, which are absolutely fantastic. Our thanks to Moo for their support of App Stories.
I wanted to stress this point of how shortcuts in iOS 13 can actually execute features from the app that offers the shortcut in the background.
Right.
And I got two more examples. One of them is a utility that we've often mentioned here on App Stories. It's a Mac Stories favorite, Text Case. Text Case, which we've been using for a couple of years to change the headlines of the articles that we publish on Mac Stories before publishing them. So we integrated Text Case in our publishing workflow so that our titles are properly formatted with the Chicago Manual of Style. capitalization method. And that used to work in iOS 12 with the Siri shortcut that, as you mentioned with pcalc, relied on the system clipboard to accept text and pass it back to a shortcut, which worked, but it was a clunky thing. It was a workaround, and it was prone to fail if anything went wrong with the clipboard or if you copied something else in the meantime. In iOS 13, text case has native parameters, so you can pass any text to the app from a shortcut, and you can choose any capitalization or text transformation format from the shortcut itself. So without ever having to open the text case app, you will be able to choose, from capitalized words or title case or sentence case or even mocking SpongeBob from the shortcut, and it'll work in the background, and the shortcut will run and it'll give you back the transformed text. But even deeper than this, I want to mention this new app that I received an email on my MacStories account about it. It's called Quickness. And Quickness is a quick way to create new contacts from shortcuts. So this is really a genius idea. So the idea would be, maybe you're meeting someone and you need to jot down a new phone number or a new email address, but you don't want to save a note. You actually want to create a new contact. But creating a contact with the Contacts app, it's kind of clunky and slow and cumbersome. Quickness has a few shortcuts that support parameters in iOS 13. And what it'll do is you can choose from different methods of creating contacts. So for example, you can do create new contact name only. So it's a way to just create a new contact card with the name of a person. Or you can do create contact detailed, and you will have parameters for all kinds of fields. So you can have an email address, you can have a phone number, and a location address, you can have a company name, and all of these parameters, you can pick and choose what you want to include in the new contact. And then you can just create a contact with a couple of taps from the Shortcuts app using this native action provided by Quickness. And what it'll do is the shortcut will run inside the Shortcuts app, but in the background, it'll actually talk to Quickness, and Quickness will talk to the native contacts framework of iOS and iPadOS and say, hey, here's the data, create a contact. And it all happens in a matter of seconds inside the Shortcuts app, and you will end up with a new contact in your Contacts app, in your address book. It'll sync with iCloud, and you'll find it everywhere else. And this is just an example of something that you're doing in Shortcuts with a third-party action that actually becomes like a native feature of the Shortcuts app and of iOS. And it's all because now developers can provide these native actions that, thanks to parameters, have completely abandoned all of the limitations of Xcallback, and they can run natively inside Shortcuts.
Yeah, that's really cool. And, I think the impact of this in part is it really is going to breathe new life into utility apps because,
yes,
now you don't, especially when you're doing automation, because now you don't have to have them in split view or slide over or go out and use the other app or use Xcallback URLs. You have integrated these utilities directly into the shortcuts that you're creating. So now you can pick and choose between which utilities have the functionality that's most important to your shortcuts, and that's a selling point now for these apps. And I think it's gonna help them find new users at this point.
Yeah, and you made a good point. I think a few weeks ago in one of our conversations that all of this sort of lends into the theory that users can create their own share extensions in a way for the share sheet using third-party actions, and so which may help explain why shortcuts have now such a prominent spot in the new share sheet.
Right, exactly. I mean, you no longer have to rely on the developer coming up with an extension that works with your use case. You can use the actions to create exactly what you want, and it shows up in the list of actions in the share sheet, just like any ones that are created by a developer of a third-party app. And I've really enjoyed that. I haven't, I had the misfortune of having some of my shortcuts fail on me this past week because when I did an update, and I am now starting from scratch. So I have my core MacStories shortcuts and I'm starting to think about and work on some things that will help me with my work going forward. And it's kind of it's the silver lining in a sense that I had a long list of shortcuts that I didn't really need that much. It's a little bit like doing a fresh install of your iPhone. I'm starting fresh with my share sheet and with my shortcuts and reevaluating exactly what is it that is most useful to me and trying to come up with some new things. So that's kind of where I stand right now.
Before we wrap up this episode, I have a grab bag of a bunch of other third-party apps with shortcuts in iOS 13 that I would like to mention. So JSON by Simon Stowring is the maker of Scriptable, really excellent app for JavaScript. JSON is an app to view .json files, and it's got new shortcuts in iOS 13 that allow you to pass JSON content to the app, and you can configure how the JSON content will be passed. So for example, you can choose to open the app and close all the other tabs that you may have open. You can choose to save the file in iCloud or locally. You can choose to not save it at all. You can choose to preview the JSON content from a notification instead of loading the JSON app. It's really well done. What a reminder is they have new shortcuts to log all kinds of drinks in the app, and as a consequence in HealthKit. And so, for example, this used to be fixed Siri shortcuts in iOS 12. Now, thanks to parameters, you can say log water or log coffee or coconut water if you're one of those people, and you can enter an amount. There's a field for the amount that you want to log, and you can do it all from shortcuts. I'm just looking through my library because I'm keeping a collection here on my device. We mentioned working copy. It's got a whole new collection of shortcuts, which are really amazing. You can push the contents of a repo to GitHub from a shortcut. You can commit your changes without having to open working copy at all. Really, really, really nice job. And finally, I would mention there was another app that I wanted to bring up here, Lookup, which is my favorite dictionary app. I also covered this one in my iOS and iPadOS 13 review. It's got a new collection of shortcuts, but my two favorites are lookup words and add to collection. So the latter will add any word, any definition to one of your named collections, which is really nice in that you no longer need to do this process manually. You can do it all from shortcuts. The lookup shortcut is amazing because it lets you choose with parameters the kind of definition that you want to get. So you can choose display the meaning or the origin or example sentences with this word. And the word is a parameter. So you can put any word in there. You can type it yourself. You can use a word that you've copied from the clipboard, or you can use a word returned by any other action. So it's really well done. And and once again, I would say there's more coming. I'm sure we'll talk about a few other apps with shortcuts in the near future. There's one I'm keeping an eye on. It's an interesting beta. It's called Toolbox Pro, which adds a bunch of native features to shortcuts through third-party actions. There's another, there's a bunch that we'll cover on Mac Stories, I'm sure, and App Stories over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for shortcuts. I'm really interested to see where all this leads. All right, Federico, I think that's probably it for today. I want to encourage our listeners again, if you wouldn't mind checking out stjude.org/relay and considering donating to St. Jude, we'd really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank our sponsors again for this episode. That's Things by Cultured Code, Linode, and Moo. And of course, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. And we're both on Twitter and Instagram. Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.